Welcome back to Wild Walks, guys. We're now well into February and the weather's taken a bit of a turn. We've had snow, and rain, high winds, all sorts of horribles, and the ground underfoot is very, very wet. The snow's literally just retreating. We're back up at Maiden Wallace, the Pin Well. But this time, we did a bit more research on public rights of way to it. You can see behind me, it's nice and clear, and open, and there's a gate. Behind that gate is a little footpath up to the Pin Well. It's literally just out the back of Wooler if you don't come over the common. So we really went about finding it the hard way. If we go and have a look, once you get to here, it's a permissive footpath up to here, and then we're on to access land. So we can go more or less wherever we want, as long as we're this side of the gate. And then after hours and hours of searching last time, it seems it was a little unnecessary. You come in, there's a working quarry just off to the high right hand side, and straight away you're into the valley that is the Pin Well, or the Maiden's Well. And then there's the King's Seat, or the King's Chair, the stone that we tried to get up to in the introductory video. Learned the lesson, I'm not going up there again today. So we've done a bit more digging and research since we were up here for the introduction episode. And it turns out there's only really one reference to Maiden Wallace Castle, and it seems to be in like the 1840s, 1850s. And it's referred to as a romanticised point above the Pin Well and the Maiden Well. What it actually seems to be is there was an Iron Age fortification put on top of the hill. I can definitely see why. We were wild enough for buzzards. 2 buzzards in fact. There's 4 of them. A pair of buzzards down here, and then a pair circling high. And what they're doing is they're catching the rising air coming off, because it's a very steep scarp on the other side as well, and where this wet front's coming in, it's pushing warm air up. So buzzards have a really distinct call. You probably heard it in the background in that shot. If you ever hear it, look up, because they really are majestic creatures. Sit and watch them for absolutely hours. And in Northumberland, we are so blessed with this sort of the vastness of species of birds of prey that we have. We've got everything from buzzards and kestrels through to red kites. It's always worth keeping your eye open. It's always worth knowing the signs, hearing and listening out for them, because sometimes you see amazing things like that. You just feel very lucky when you see something like that in the wild. I mean, the bugger just a walk up. Particularly when you consider the nearest Scottish border down in the valley and over. Yeah. I wouldn't fancy running up this for full battle here. What it actually is an Iron Age settlement, or hill fort, up on the top here. And you can see why. There's this violently dropping down and climbing up this really steep-sided valley, providing a natural rampart with broken stone all down the edges. You can imagine if this was garrisoned by men at the top, throwing rocks and spears and shooting arrows down at you. It would have been hell on earth to attack up. Every side of this fortification is steep. And then, as you can see when we went through in the introductory video, it's completely flat on the summit. It wasn't just the Iron Age settlers that used it, it was picked up and used again by the Romans to defend a small settlement just on the far side of those trees, where we've had archaeological finds coming out of the ground for the last 50 years proving Roman industry and agriculture in the Wyld Valley. The rampart, it's steep. Oh, not even there yet, there's still more. And then the last, oh wow, God, it's really steep. I mean, that's a person. I'm not wearing armour. I'm not carrying a sword, shield, spear, any war accoutrements, and there's nobody at the top throwing things down at me. And that was fairly hard work. And also, not in leather-soled shoes. Just looking from the summit of this hill fort, Kettle Hill, we find a really obvious reason why it became a defensive position. You've got these deep, plunging valleys on either side that form a natural defence. You've got a good all-round view, because remember, this is modern plantation. When you're out and you're walking in the ancient landscape, you've got to throw your mind back several thousand years and try and imagine what it's like without all of the modern plantation, all the modern trees. And sometimes it's a completely different view of the landscape that you get. But looking around from up here, you can certainly see why our Iron Age ancestors decided that this was such a good site defensively. You can see all the way across the valley, all the way down to Ross Castle on the horizon. We'll be going there very, very shortly. So what we're going to do over the course of this episode is take a look at the Wyld Valley itself, the history surrounding Wyld and how it came to be one of the first medieval market towns, and what happened right the way back from 2,000 or 3,000 BC to the Industrial Revolution, and even beyond, because on the top of this hill there's some strange little concrete footings that look to be a signalling mast, and Wyld is surrounded by a network of 13 pillboxes, but nobody with us knows anything about that. Wyld sits in northern Northumberland, which until the beginning of the 12th century was ruled over by a succession of earls, primarily Anglo-Saxon, and then Danish, and finally, eventually, Norman. Today, Wyld is a quiet little village, well served by shops and pubs. The Angel, built in the 18th century, is on the site of an even earlier inn, and then the Red Lion looks to be 19th century, but behind that facade lies a 17th century interior, and it's now number 1. Wyld's got very ancient origins.
and its original name may be from the Old English wella, which is a well or a spring, and offa, which is a ridge or hill, although a record of the name of Welnfer, W-E-L-N-F-V-E-R, in 1186 seems to suggest this as an origin. Another possible origin for the name is Wuffa's hillside, from the Old English personal name of Wuffa or wolf, and Ora, meaning hillside or slope, although it is debated, as there is no record until Wulwar in 1232, suggesting a possible origin, but nobody really knows. Nature's taken its toll on Wooler over the years, and the water itself even carried away the bridge.
In the middle of Wooler is a little hill that's referred to as Tower Hill, or the Tory locally, and on it stand these monstrous remains, 1.5 metre thick masonry walls, which are remnants of the 16th century fortified tower that stood here. Some locals say there was a wooden castle here in the 12th century looking out over the Wooler Valley as well, but now at the summit there stands a rather spectacular war memorial. These huge blocks of stone are remnants of the tower, and it's first recorded in 1509 and was probably here during the period of the Anglo-Scots Wars. So when they were coming up and down across the border and raiding into England and vice versa, these fortified peel towers and bastle houses were built all along the Northumbrian border, and then if you were ever attacked by the marauding Scots, you could disappear and hide in your tower until they'd gone away and left you alone. At least that was the plan. But it obviously didn't work that well, because when you look at some of the family names in the Wooler local, they're all very big Scottish border reiver names even to this day. There's a lot of evidence of settlement and civilization around Wooler, dating right back from the early Bronze Age and the prehistoric, with standing stones out as far as Duddo and on the top of the moors. But there's no reference to Wooler as a place in the Domesday Book. And this is because in 1086, when the Normans commissioned the Domesday Book and took all of the place names for the villages, Wooler was still not under Norman rule. It was very much hotly contested, and it still had the border moving up and down between whether it was England and Scotland or the Kingdom of Northumbria itself. The first mention of Wooler as a location actually comes in 1107 with the creation of the first Baron. Wooler rose to prosperity and was granted a market licence in 1199 to hold a market once a week on every Thursday by the Baron of Wooler. Now I found a really good quote, I couldn't remember it so I had to write it down. It says, "His barony is situated in an ill-cultivated country under the influence of vast mountains, from whence it is subject to impetuous rains." Well, I've lived here a few years, and I can certainly say the land now is much better used, but it's mainly arable. It's mainly animal farming. There's not a huge amount of crops. There's a lot of grass farming and turf farming, but not a huge amount of actual sort of waving fields of corn, so that still stands true. Surrounded by these huge mountains, that's still very true, as we'll discover when we move out into the wider landscape of the Wooler Valley. And impetuous rains, that's still definitely true. The weather in the Wooler Valley is extreme, from wind and rain and hail to snow and sleet, because we're the first dip on the countryside after coming straight off the coast from Bamborough and Holy Island. Water seems to feature very heavily in Wooler's history, floods and devastation, but equally fire. There have been two huge fires that have ripped through Wyld in 16 and 1700s that reformed the village and changed the way it's laid out to what we know as its modern layout now in the 19th and 20th century, all caused by natural disaster, fire and flood. Anywhere you go in Wyld, it's fairly obvious that there's been an industrial past from that tiny little market town in 1190. It expanded and declined over and over again over the years, through fire and through battle and through destruction. But everywhere you turn there are signs of mass industry. Huge warehouses, old railway lines, mine heads. And at some point during the Industrial Revolution, Wyld was a centre for textile dyeing. And somewhere here in the old yard, there were dye pits. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I've never checked. I reckon it was these buildings here. Doesn't look much, but these are the remnants of Wyld's industrial past. So it might not look like much now, but a couple of hundred years ago this site would have been teeming with people, full of industrial activity all along the valley, railway lines running backwards and forwards to central Newcastle and even beyond. It seems strange to think that these buildings that have been a fixture in Wyld's history for so long soon aren't going to be there anymore. Because as we go forward into the next year or so, they're going to be knocking them down. They're going to be making way for a new chapter in history in Northumberland. They're putting in a distillery. If we're paying attention at the start of the series, when we did the teaser, we went to Aggefer into Old Bewick, so they're bringing back the history and heritage from the place of the kings into a new era in Wyld, bringing in new jobs and leaving a permanent change and impact on the landscape and the people around it. There it is, that's Ross Hill or Ross Castle. It's a view that I've been looking at out of my living room window for 2 or 3 years and never been up there, so I'm going to go and have a nosy and see what's going on. So we've climbed up from the car park to the crags that are marked on the map, and I mean, it's a steep little pull up, all of that down there for all the blueberries and bits, and then across a load of broken ground to here, and just well, it looks like some fairly interesting climbing, which is awesome because it's maybe, I don't know, a quarter of a mile tops from the car park. We're on the hill on the other side of the valley from Ross Hill, or Ross Castle, which is over my shoulder behind us. We can stop in the crags at the top having a look around, and the thing with Northumberland is it's renowned for little caves and hideaways. Cuthbert's Cave, Doddington's Cave, Duddow Hole, all these little places, and just completely unexpectedly,
Bottom of crag. Big old cave. Don't know how far in it goes. I'm gonna go and have a look. This is so glamorous. It's obviously been used by sheep quite a bit. But if I was a Neolithic person or an Iron Age traveller looking for somewhere to sleep out of the elements, I mean, it's cold outside, and we've literally just ducked in here under this slab of rock, and it's actually all right, isn't it?
You can feel the difference temperature-wise.
It's not as immediately cold, and you know, you could get a fire going, and yeah, I think you'd be relatively cosy. So we've got a bit of light. We're back deeper into the cave piece now. I mean, not a million miles from the entrance. You can still see daylight, but I can almost stand up. And there are some holes out to the surface.
Good natural chimneys for a fire.
But, you know, it's out the wind and it's tucked back, and there are ledges and shelves of dry space. I think, you know, if I was an Iron Age traveller going between the hill forts or the settlements, and dusk was coming in, knowing Northumberland weather with the rain and the cold, and in this weather snow, I'd be quite happy with this.
It is quite cosy.
It's not bad, eh? It's not uninhabitable. I mean, it's a bit drafty where I'm sat because there's a run through up there out to fresh air. But it's
It'd stop you dying.
I wouldn't want to spend too long here. I couldn't imagine being Cuthbert and retreating to something like this for as long as he did, but it's not bad. Yeah, might come back up here at some point with a brighter torch and explore a bit further. Hey. That behind me there is Ross Hill, or Ross Castle as it's known locally. There's a hill fort or a ringed settlement bank on the top of it, and it's the highest point in the Chillingham Hills all the way along. So what we've done is we've walked up the other side of the valley above the crags, and we found this little space up here. And I was just saying to Mark as we were walking through it, I think this is about as close as you're going to find to an Iron Age landscape in Northumberland, because it's got the broken brush at sort of knee height, there's some bracken, there's no conifers, it's all small silver birch and deciduous trees onto the open moorland. And literally just as we were saying that, we crested into this flatter area. As we walked through it, we suddenly found a gap in a bank that's got huge stones set either side of it, and climbing up onto the top of it, it's definitely another ringed enclosure that I didn't see on the map. So I'm going to have to go back and look at aerial photography again and see if I can find it on an aerial shot and see if there's any information on the monument sites about it, because it's definitely a ringed enclosure, you know. But it's in sight of Ross Hill and Chatton Moor, and again it's on the high ground between here and Evering. So, god damn it! Look how steep the edge is behind us. It really goes up. It's quite a significant bank. Why would you have it so close to another site as big as Ross Castle? Because there's not like a natural spring here or anything. Every time I do this, more questions than answers. It's really steep. Actually, Mark, I'll tell you what, you just stand there, mate, at the bottom, and I'll fight my way up to the top. Cue adventurous dramatic music. To the top, and I mean that gives you an idea of the height difference.
I mean, they need to see the garden now, because this is a joke now. Is that halfway up this?
It's mad, but it is a very defined high raised bank. I mean, look, you can see it running
down here it's almost completely clear on the top. And it runs in a very defined circle with 3 dip entrances. Because if I walk this way, there's another very, very obviously cut in bank, and actually down inside it there's big dressed stones. So this was definitely a ringed settlement of some description, because you wouldn't go to the effort of moving these huge stones if it wasn't to protect something. Now, maps do us a massive disservice for this period when we're looking at Iron Age history, because early antiquarians, or the early archaeologists, were absolutely obsessed with the classical era. They were absolutely addicted to the Romans and the Greeks. So anything that they found that had a ring around it was a fort, and a hill fort for the Celtic tribes fighting against the Romans. Which means every time you look on a map, these settlements will be denoted as hill forts. And they might not always be. Now, looking from this side, I can see maybe 2 obvious sort of areas inside where there isn't much in the middle, so it implies that there's packed hard ground underneath it. I don't know, Iron Age is not one of my specialist areas, although living in this part of Northumberland, I think it probably ought to be. I think it's something we definitely need to look into more going forward, because I live 5 minutes from here. This is unreal. There's 3 settlements within the space of a kilometre, all on this high ground, all looking out across Northumberland, and all on the other side of the valley to the seat of the kings in the 6th century. And there's not a single note down in the car park or on the walk up here. There's not even a well-marked footpath to it. And then at the top there's this beautiful little grove of silver birch trees, which in this weather is really quite magical. You know, you can sort of feel the ancestors under your feet. It's really, really surreal. It's cold, it's crisp, it's clear. There's snow lying on the high ground.
It feels calm.
Yeah.
Everything just sort of, it's weird.
There's something about it, isn't there? There's this sense of, I don't know, there's this gravitas of age. Definitely this series has inspired me already to do is try and live a little bit more in the way of the ancestors, and, you know, maybe try and eat a more traditional diet, or maybe come up and do like an overnighter just in Iron Age gear or medieval kit, and explore some of the sites in the kit and in the style that our ancestors would have found them. This place is, again, it's just off the side of the road. I can't get my head around it. It's amazing. I mean, it's not just off the side of the road, it's a bloody great hill, but it's still so accessible. So we're making our way across the broken ground on the way in, and suddenly there's these really defined trenches in the ground, and they run for a really long way in either direction. They're deep. Now there's heather and bracken and all sorts over them, but they're really, really steep up and down ditches. Gosh dear. Oh, so maybe there's 3 or 4 of them in a row. Maybe it's a freak of the ground. I don't know. Maybe this is part of the earthworms, because these definitely don't look natural. They look man-made to me. Now, what we've got down there, I'm going to pretend to be our settlement defender up here on the top of the hill, and old Mark down there is going to be a ravaging, I don't know, Iron Age tribesman or a Roman soldier. He's going to try and get to me as fast as he can if he was attacking just over these banks. Not with palisade walls on the top. Yeah, give it a blast, Mark.
I think I've got an easier way, but
I'll tell you what, I'll walk along this way so we've got a straight line. Ah! Oh! Well, go on then. So he disappears into the first ditch, up over a high wall, into the next ditch, up the hill, and then he's got another one to go, and that's before you even get to that. You know, what do you reckon, Mike? Fancy doing that in full chain?
nah. That's without getting things chucked to this or arrows.
Yeah.
loose to this.
And even just from this high bit of ground here, I've got so much vantage to throw things down or projectile weapons or whatever I want, and I'm only stood on the top of the bank. This is ridiculous.
The depth.
I mean, there's a good 8-foot variance between the bottom of that and foot level on the top of the hill. So we're talking climbing 50 odd foot before you even get to this point. If this is natural and naturally formed, this is one of the greatest natural defences I've seen at an Iron Age site. But of course, we know they were really good for this. They used to use the steep ground to cover themselves off. In fact, there's a hill fort far side of the Cheviot that's got this huge dressed stone face on it on one side, which is the side facing towards Evering. And if I get a chance, in the next episode, I'll take a run up there and show you what I mean. We're, I don't know, maybe a third of the way up. We've just fought through all of the sort of knee-high scrub. That was hard work, and it just goes
That yet?
up. The thing is, like, it doesn't come over on camera quite how steep that is behind me. I don't think. You know, I've seen this every day from my house, and at the start of the video, when I'm looking at the map and stuff, that shot out the window across the valley to this hill, you can see how significant it is. I mean, it really sticks out in the landscape. But looking at it, if it was a defensive position in Iron Age times, there is no way you're attacking up this in a hurry. You can see for miles, and it's really steep. And the thing is, it's not like the landscape up here has been that affected. There's modern planting on the other side of the hill, but over here it's blueberries and bracken and heather and gorse. It's as close probably to the Northumbrian Iron Age landscape as you're going to get, bar this massive wall in the background that's Chillingham Estates. So that's a relatively recent addition, but the rest of it is almost as was. I mean, I'd say we're not unfit guys, but the thought of trying to do this in full war regalia with your mail shirt and maybe even, you know, helms and swords and shields and spears at a run.
And that's after you've had to hike all the way up here as well.
Yeah, it's mad. Right, so for the truly authentic experience, we're going straight up the steepest edge, just to see how knackered we are when we get to the top. So we'll see you up there. Okay, so this is us climbing up the last little bit to the summit. That was steep, and we're going through this knee-deep scrub of heather and wild blueberries everywhere. Not in war gear, not in a rush, not in medieval shoes, and my god, that was hard work. But I can 100% see why up here became a fortress or a significant place of worship. So here we go, there's a little viewing platform on the top. And over there in the distance is Lindisfarne and Bamborough. Amble, Almouth, Alnwick. The only thing higher than this is all the way over there in the Cheviot, under that snow cap. This just utterly dominates the landscape. This is not what I expected to find up here at all. There's a trig point at the top. It's 220 metres higher than the surrounding area, which means it qualifies as a Marilyn, weirdly. Which is a nice bit of mountain walking. You can come to Northumberland and bag yourself one of the Marilyns just by walking like half a mile from the car park, but it's around about 1,000 feet above sea level, stood here. And it's the highest point on the ridge between Bamborough and the Cheviots, between Berwick and Alnwick. It's quite surreal, knowing that 3,000 plus years ago there was a settlement or a fort right here, and the big stones that are lying around were moved by hand by the people that actually shaped the prehistory of Northumberland. It's a bit steep.
It's a little bit straight down.
So we've come over to the other side of the valley. You can just see Ross Hill there in the background behind me. You know, in a straight line, it's not that far at all. But there's another hill fort up behind me on this side, and then a different view of the Wooler and Cheviot Valley behind me there. Again, this low winter sun's really not doing me any favours. But the reason we've come up here is there's some really significant archaeology up here, and some of the best examples of cup and ring markings in the whole of the northeast.
Possibly, is it a settlement, saying big settlement that way, smaller one, because that's in line with the hill fort? It's probably drive you insane trying to work it all out.
This is it, like nobody really knows what they were. There's suggestions that the rings are, you know, that it's constellation markers, that it's concentric rings of the planets as they understood them. It's these ones that fascinate me, the dots, because you can only see them from certain angles, but those beasties there, they're in sets of 6 and 8 all over this site. Look, there's another one here, you can just see it fading away. There's 2, 4, 6, and then another 2, 4, 6 there. And again, they follow down this little carved rivulet, and there, right beside it, are the inclusions of the iron. And this flows all the way down through the slab, out onto the moor. So, was it a sacred site because of the iron? You know?
There's literally an inch thick worth of iron there.
This is
one
all
long seam.
just here, iron ore in the rock. So is Chatton Moor, this high ground under the site of Ross Castle over there, and this incredible vista of the Cheviot Hills. Was it just the iron that made it sacred? Or was there something else?
You can see why, like, the things like the King's Seat and all that, I mean, with views that they would have had, it would make you feel like a god, being above everyone, towering as close to the god as you can get.
Well, tell you what, let's head on up to that trig point on the horizon, because there's one more thing I want to show you before the sun sets. Over the side of the hill here,
Holy!
aside from being really steep, down at the bottom is a tapstone. There's a little sacred spring and a little keystone. In the right light, you can actually see the lay of the land here. And, you know, you don't have to be an archaeologist or a historian to look at the lay of the land around here and go, well, that's definitely man-made. This classic double bump shape with the top wall and another one spiralling outwards, and then if you look where Mark is at the moment, there's this dip to the wall. So what were they showing off? Because this side is incredibly fortified on the steepest side with this huge hill. But the other side is just a small earthwork. So is it the same? Was it dressed stone? Is it to show off to somebody that lives down in this valley? Bear in mind you've still got Evering and the sacred site over that side. And then you've got Cuthbert's Cave, a Christian site from 890 or thereabouts over this way. What was it about this part of Northumberland in prehistory that made it so significant, and obviously carried on through the years to create these huge monasteries and abbeys like Lindisfarne, like Durham? What was it that so inspired people in this landscape? I don't know. But I can definitely feel something.
Something quite humbling, knowing you're standing at 3,000 years, over 3,000 years ago, and still here.
This hill fort, if the little archaeological survey and stuff that's been done is to be believed, this is 3000 BC. So this is 5,000 years old, and the rock art on the top could be up to 8,000 BC.
And it's not like I can say, oh, it's,
you know,
not,
up
it's
to 8,000 years
natural.
old. Sorry, it could be up to 8,000 years old in the rock art, because that could be from 5th or 6th millennia BC. So 5 or 6,000 BC. You know, this is the cradle of humanity in the northeast, which is just ludicrous.
Mark, you're standing in the middle of it.
It's incredible. Oh, well spotted. Look at that. There's your dressed stone in the wall. So this is definitely man-made and all put together. And you can see just where the frost's falling there. All the way along, this entire wall has been made in the same style. And then the earthwork banks and the ditches and the run out. And here, on this side, we actually have a little sign. This is what makes this site so significant in its own way, is there's actually the backfill ditch, which I hope comes out on camera, but you can see there's this natural contour shape here, which is where they've dug down, created a ditch, and then thrown the spoil both ways to make the banks even higher. And there it is.
You can see the shape of the stone on that wall as well, where the moss is just clunging.
So, was it a defensive position? Was it a military position? Was it an enclosed farmstead? Or, given that it's only this side that has this impressive earthwork on, is it like some of the other sites and it's purely showing off to your neighbours? And as Mark's already said a couple of times today, until we develop a time machine and go back and ask him, guess we can only speculate. And you know what? I don't know that it matters. It's pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
This little gem here is the Holy Trinity Church. It has its origins all the way back, certainly 12th century, according to archaeologists. Some believe even earlier. There's some argument that this is truly an Anglo-Saxon site, and there's evidence for Anglo-Saxon structure and stone in the building of the walls itself and in the layout of the chapel, this rounded tower at this end on the lowest level down here. You can see where it transitions from round to square. There's argument that this is Anglo-Saxon with their Norman on top, but the Anglo-Saxons might have nicked some stone from the Romans, which is really an incredible thought. Once you're inside, you definitely get a sense that this is a much older building than it actually looked from the outside. The architecture is very inspired by Anglo-Saxon and Norman, and then as you make your way down, you're confronted by this beautiful painted stonework and the little set windows, and then this gilded vaulted roof. And this lady effigy is dated from the 14th century, and she's in formal wear. Supposedly it was carved by a workshop of masons in Alnwick in 1356. It's still here. No protective glass, no nothing. It definitely feels very old, you know, much more so than cathedrals or buildings of a similar age in Newcastle. Stunningly beautiful, which was an unusual thing for a heathen to say about a Christian church, but it really is. What is it about Northumberland? I mean, why have such a concentration of things here? You know, we've got Anglo-Saxon churches and prehistoric monuments, right through to holy bastions where these great illuminations are written. I mean, I think I know why. I always feel closer to whatever I believe when I'm up in the hills in Northumberland or in the mountains anywhere, but in a landscape like this, I always feel more connected to my personal beliefs, being out in the wild places. And I wonder if that is simply all it was. It was a wild, untamed landscape that the first people thought they could maybe come to some kind of understanding by marking religious sites. Maybe they felt they could tame it by building these huge monuments. And then maybe that's what the Christians saw, a wild and untamable land full of marauding Northumberland people that needed brought to heel. Or maybe they too were just impressed by the beauty of the place. I've said before, it's often frustrating going out to places like this and finding these amazing sites like Ross Castle, like the stones on the hill, like Old Bewick Church, with its mix of archaeology and dates and history, and finding one answer and 400 new questions. I think Northumberland is going to be a place that just keeps giving and giving and giving for this series. I can imagine that climb behind me there wouldn't be a huge amount of fun if it's particularly wet and rainy, but decent footwear, you shouldn't have any problems at all. But do make sure you stay on the waymarked footpaths up here, as it is across private land. I mean, it's not like it's particularly difficult to follow the signs. They're fairly obvious, and it's the country code and the countryside right away. Access says leave gates as you find them. And there's quite a clear, obvious path with climbing over footpath stiles and permissive rights of way.
Stiles are in good condition as well.
And it's fairly obvious where you're going. Up there, into the trees. Kind of surreal, you pop from completely open moorland, surrounded by gorse, into this pine grove that has the light of the open moorland on one side and then this deep, deep darkness off on the other as the woodland encloses and encroaches around you. But you walk up a fairly secluded little path following a raise in the high ground, and you come to a clearing. Now, according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle by Bede, in 875, as the Danes were attacking Lindisfarne, he says they destroyed all the monasteries, and Eardulf, the Bishop of Lindisfarne, and Abbot Eithred, or possibly Eardred, took the body of Cuthbert from the island of Lindisfarne and wandered for 7 years. And apparently, a legend has it, this is where they brought the body. There's definitely enough space under this to shelter a small troop of people from the elements. Doesn't seem very hospitable with this big open front, especially living in the area. I know the wind normally comes from that way all the time, so it'd be blowing in here. But certainly got a good view of the surroundings. And there is cover over top. So in a pinch, yeah, although I'm not sure that necessarily I believe the legends that he came here as a place of hermitage. When you see the other hermits' caves, like the ones on the Holy Island, things like that out in Arran, they're much more closed off, or even the one down over the river in Warkworth. They're not big and open like this. Very impressive though. There's all carvings along in the stone. It's not something I've ever understood. There's a need to set your name in stone in a place, but it's very popular. Obviously. And look at this one. 1752. Could be these initials. Henry HY, maybe? 1752. No, 200 years ago. Plus, somebody thought it was worth coming here and carving their name in the stone. And then next to it is 1786. 1864. Another incomplete 1819. There's 1849. I mean, if you were inclined to and you could catch light just right, you could come up here and spend a day just reading the names of people who've visited before. Maybe even find a familiar name. I know a Sprott. There's one carved in here. Probably not the same guy, but you know. It's almost like reading a memorial or a monument. Looking at some of these, knowing that whoever wrote them is long gone in some cases.
formations and shapes on the rocks here where they've worn away over the years. It's almost leaf-like on the top. Really, really beautiful. One of the things I always love about coming anywhere, be it, you know, traditional, indigenous, British spirituality places, pagan places, or places of Christian significance, is you always find these little offerings that have been made and left by people. Just little charms, little prayers. Yeah. Just of all the places I've been so far in this episode, you know, with Ross Castle and over on Castle Hill and Kettle, I think this is my favourite so far. There's a real, I don't know, tangible sense of something much older than you. Maybe I just like big bits of stone, I don't know. No, this is definitely a place, if you're ever in Northumberland, that you should come and check out. The scale of the place, when you see photos of it and things, it doesn't do it justice. It's megalithic, it's huge. It's just this slab of rock edge and then nothing, just a complete cut off drop. And there's one crazy column still supporting the edge and holding everything up, and it's all over head height, you know, it's easily 6 foot high. You can comfortably stand inside it. And there's evidence of fires and people having camped out here, and it's another one of those very peaceful places that really isn't that far from civilization. I mean, there's a farm by the car park. There's a main road and a village 5 minutes away. But if you stop and look closely up here, you can almost see those 9th century monks reverently laying down a body of their beloved saint, lighting a fire and wondering what's to come after the monastery that was a shining beacon of the faith, of the Christian faith, has just been so violently attacked by outlandish men in dragon-headed ships. What must have been going through their minds. I mean, you can certainly see why, if they'd just been chased off Holy Island by these terrifying Danes, these wild men of the north, these Vikings, they'd want somewhere that commanded a view. Now, a lot of these trees, this is relatively modern growth. I'm not sure on the age of the plantation, but I imagine in Cuthbert's time the landscape was fairly similar, but the layout of the woodlands was probably fairly different. But if you've got the cave up behind us here, it looks out straight across the valley, all the way to the far hills and Evering, Mailman, Place Kings, all the way over on the far horizon. So it must have felt, I don't know, safe, maybe familiar. Maybe there was a reason they came here. Maybe it was a hermit's point that they used to send people to on a pilgrimage type expedition or a retreat. Maybe it was a familiar place, or maybe they just happened to cross it, and with its view over the hills and the surroundings, it seemed like a safe bet. Access land. It's governed by the Countryside Rights of Way Act. And it basically means as long as you're not being a dick, you can go pretty much wherever you like. So I think what we're going to do now, having been along and looked at the cave, is go up to Raven's Crag on the top, and then along and over Kyloe, and try and catch a sunset over the hills. And then if you do ever visit the cave, the moorland out behind it, as we've just seen, is open access land, but to get to it you have to go in and out through the gate at the bottom. Quite often in open access land there aren't obvious paths, so again, having the right kit makes all the difference. Just go and get lost in nature. Go and explore and have an adventure. Find your way up to the high places. Stand on the top, look around. If there's one thing I hope you guys watching at home take away from this entire series, don't stand idly by. Miss that wonderful world that's right there in front of you. Never stop looking up. Over the course of making this episode, it started off looking at a plot of Northumberland on a map and historical sites off, references online and in manuscripts, and it made no sense at all. From when we went up Ross Castle, saying why there, looking out over the valley and trying to make sense of this ancient landscape, it was all muddled up. It didn't make any sense at all. Knowing the Romans were here and knowing that the Norsemen or the Vikings had such an impact, and that Christianity came through so heavily into this place, and trying to understand everything from the Bronze Age and Iron Age roots, it made absolutely no sense. And then as we've explored further out and got a better sense of just the feel of the land, you start to see, patterns and links, and things start to almost make a crazy kind of sense. You look and you go, yeah, now looking back across the valley, I see why Ross Castle was there. Whether it was religious or defensive, it's a show of strength being that. As you can see it miles in any direction. I don't know if it's because we're looking at the landscape in a different mindset or a different way, or if it is literally just the fact that we're starting to sort of tune in and synchronicity's kicking in a bit, and we're starting to see things that otherwise we just wouldn't notice. Or if it's ancient Northumberland starting to give up us. There's so much more to find out about this county. There's so much more to find out about this valley on its own. So next time. the next episode. We're going to the other side of the valley. To the settlement around Jeffrey.